You're listening to Reach, Teach, Talk with Nat Dane.
I'm here in London with Adrian Bethune, here in a London episode of Reach, Teach, Talk, and I am very excited to have you here on this program, Adrian.
I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. I met Adrian about a month ago at a conference up in Cambridge, and Adrian, I immediately ordered your book on Amazon, Wellbeing in the Primary Classroom. It is an incredible treasure trove of exercises, advice, strategies for primary school, which in the U.S. would be elementary school teachers. And this material works. And I would even recommend it for teachers at the secondary school level, just as a reminder about how the brain works, the connections of emotions and cognition to learning, and also just to be inspired by this incredibly inspiring teacher. So, Adrian, why don't you talk about kind of why are you here? What brought you to this studio right now? What's your career kind of history? What brought you into teaching? And feel free to also celebrate kind of what you're doing outside of the classroom as well, because all of that's very exciting.
Yeah, so it's been a long journey. Probably started in terms of my journey into teaching back in 2008. I worked not too far from where this studio is. So I worked on Berners Street, which is in the West End of London. I worked in music publishing, and I had a well-paid job. It was fairly interesting. I had a girlfriend. I had a good social life, and then things unexpectedly started to kind of unravel for me. I got on the property ladder at the time of the world financial crisis, and suddenly I just felt this huge burden and weight on my shoulder, like I have this mortgage and, you know, everything that's happening around me, will I lose my job? And I started to feel anxious. And I'd always been quite a happy-go-lucky kind of guy and had periods of, you know, anxiety and stuff, but nothing major, whereas this was like an anxiety that wasn't shifting. And then that took its toll on my relationship, and I ended up breaking up with my girlfriend. I had a big fallout with my best friend who lived just around the corner from the flat I was living in. So I found myself living in this one-bedroom flat alone in London, and I just felt acutely lonely. Like, seriously, that was the overriding emotion. So yes, there was anxiety there, but I just felt incredibly lonely, which I think is exacerbated when you live and work in a capital city, a really busy city. It's all of these people, but you feel disconnected from them all, essentially. And that period of kind of acute anxiety got worse, and it led to a bout of depression. I think mainly because I couldn't sleep at night. The anxiety was keeping me up, and I burned myself out.
And that compounds itself, doesn't it? If you're not sleeping, you're feeling worse during the day when you're awake, right? And
Yeah. And your perspective goes completely and things that normally brought me joy, like playing football, seeing my friends, I was still going to these things. I was turning up at work, but it was like I was just observing. I just didn't feel connected at all. Anyway, so that was like a profoundly difficult period for me, and during that I had this, it's not even epiphany, just a realization that I was someone that had worked incredibly hard at school during my exams and at university, and I kind of thought to myself during this difficult time, I have all of this knowledge, all of these qualifications, and I literally have no idea how to help myself feel better or get better. I was like literally in a rut, and I didn't know what to do.
There was no course you took at uni that was about
exactly.
how to
you know,
lift up.
so back in 2008, 2009, talking about mental health, happiness, well-being, it really wasn't that common at all. And I didn't have any shame about how I was feeling, but equally I didn't know who to talk to about it. I didn't know what to talk about. Anyway, I had a good group of friends and family around me that were very supportive, and that they massively helped me. And a chance conversation with a friend said to me, he said, "I've seen a counsellor. Maybe you should see one." And even him opening up to me about that was like, "Whoa! I didn't know that you could go and see a counsellor and speak to this." So anyway, this started a journey of kind of self-discovery, reflection. I started to read about the causes of anxiety and depression. I discovered that there was a science of well-being and happiness, and there was research about what makes us happy and what makes us unhappy. Basically, I kind of taught myself all of this stuff that, in a way, I wish I'd learned at school, because I felt it on reflection, it could have really helped me. One of the things that I'd read in my research was that the happiest people often give a lot. They often volunteer, or they're giving their time or their money or whatever to other people. And so I signed up to a mentoring scheme. So I volunteered for a year, a charity in London called Chance UK, and I mentored a 9-year-old boy in Hackney, which is quite a poor part of a borough of London, who was at risk of being kicked out of school because he was aggressive and violent. And I got to know a lovely little boy whose anger, I guess, was a symptom of his home life. He was a single parent family. His mother had mental health issues. His brother was involved in a local gang. And his school weren't really helping him. So I did that for a year. At the same time, my really good friend from university asked me to be a governor at the school that she worked in. And those two things, being a governor, volunteering, mentoring, just made me reflect and think, actually, my job, it's enjoyable, but it's not meaningful. And I felt that my life was lacking a sense of direction and purpose.
So your job at this time was still in the music business?
Still music industry, yeah.
And being a governor is, for the folks in the US, it's being on a school board. It's being a board member of a school.
Yeah.
And was this a primary school? Like
primary school, yeah. I was chair of the finance committee, so I was using my kind of music industry financial knowledge to help the school. But yeah, I was just getting so much out of working with this young boy, volunteering at the school, and I thought, actually, this is where I want to spend more time. I want to teach children. I also want to help the children, like the boy I was mentoring, with their emotional difficulties, help them fit in, help them be happy, help them be a success, because I felt his school wasn't doing that for him. So I retrained to be a teacher in 2010 with this bold ambition to do all of that stuff I've just mentioned, kind of really focus on the stuff that matters in the classroom. And I was very quickly kind of disillusioned, because the focus in UK education had changed massively from when I was at school. And even at primary, elementary school, it was all about results. It was about results in English, results in maths. It was about progress. It was about academic attainment. And because of that, there wasn't time to focus on emotional issues of children. There wasn't time to focus on happiness and well-being, because the curriculum was packed with content we had to just get through.
And Adrian, this sounds very familiar to what was going on across the pond at the same time, which was the race to the top. Arne Duncan, Education Secretary under President Obama, at the exact same time, it's this idea of race to the top. So if your student test scores are doing well, your school will be ranked higher and you will be at the top. And state by states started competing against each other for this recognition as being on at the top, but based on quantitative metrics. And as a teacher, teachers were also in the US being assessed on their efficacy based on their student test scores, which seems a bit unfair, because as a teacher, you don't know who the students are that are going to come into your classroom every year, and every year they're different.
Yeah.
And it's not the idea, there's no hero teacher out there who can work magic with any group of kids and bring them all up to the top. I mean, you work with what you get and you meet the kids where they are. So anyhow, it's just interesting to note, this story sounds so familiar to many teachers I've talked with in the US around the same time, this idea of, is really my job to achieve through test scores and through quantitative metrics, or I thought it was something different. So anyhow, let's get back to your story.
Yeah, and that was what I was reflecting on the time, this vision I had of how I was going to teach and what I was going to teach and how I was going to help these kids was not marrying up with the reality. And I felt disillusioned. And not only that, because of the relentless pace and pressure of a typical teaching day, I started to feel the anxiety coming back, and I started to find it hard to sleep at night, and I found it hard to eat my lunch at lunchtime because I had that sickening feeling in my stomach. And I actually started to kind of dread going into school most days, because I was teaching in a London primary school. It was a challenging school. And the reality of going from mentoring one child one-to-one to having 30 children was a massive learning curve for me. The difference was, in terms of that feelings of anxiety, was that so by this stage, 2 years later, I was in a new relationship. What I had learned as part of that previous difficult time, I spotted the signs really early. I could recognize that I wasn't sleeping well, that I couldn't eat. Whereas before I might have just ignored it and put it to the back. I spoke to my girlfriend about it, and I was open with her about how I was feeling. So just talking, which was something I hadn't done, a couple of years before. And also I just made some subtle changes. I made sure that I was going to bed earlier. I was trying to stay away from stimulants like alcohol and tea and coffee before bed, so I got a good night's sleep. I was exercising more, and that really helped. The other thing that happened, and this was kind of, I guess, fortuitous, kind of lucky, another teacher that was on my teacher training course. I studied at London South Bank University, and I was studying at university 1 day a week, and the other 4 days I was in the classroom. One of my teacher training buddies, when she could hear that I was feeling disillusioned and kind of actually angry at the state of UK education, she lent me a book, and she said, I think you should read this book. And it was called Teaching Happiness and Wellbeing in Schools by a teacher called Ian Morris, who was a secondary high school teacher. And basically his book shared a lot of the science of well-being, positive psychology, and gave some ideas of how to embed it in your school. And although it was aimed at a higher age group, I started to tweak some of the ideas and bring some of the ideas into my classroom setting. And just that gave me a sense of agency and empowerment and a sense of purpose. Actually, this is what I got into teaching to do, and now I'm actually doing it. And although I'm doing it on a small scale, it can grow from here. So then I read more books, and I thought, actually, all these books for adults on positive psychology and well-being, why can't I tailor some of that to my 6-7-year-old kids that I'm teaching? So I brought in a mindfulness meditation practice in the morning, because I was doing a mindfulness course myself, and over a period of a few years, I just started to embed more. I went on more courses, I learned more, I spoke to other teachers, and then fast forward to 2018. Well, actually, it would have been 2017. I kept Googling well-being in the primary classroom. I was looking for books aimed at primary and elementary schools, and I just couldn't find any that were written by teachers. I could find them written by psychologists. And
why does that matter?
Because teachers or people that have spent a lot of time in the classroom know the reality of a typical classroom and the myriad of issues that might come up and the innumerable amount of variables. Whereas I think sometimes when you might be a mental health expert, a psychologist, and you think, okay, do this in the classroom, and a teacher might think, well, actually, that's not going to work how you've presented it. So, and that was the massive appealing thing about Ian's book. He is still a practicing teacher. So yeah, I couldn't find a book aimed at primary school teachers, and I thought, sod it, I'll write my own. And I started to write just the first few chapters. I wrote the preface, which was just my journey from kind of mental ill health to becoming a teacher. And I mentioned that I was starting to write a book to my best friend, who was someone that had really helped me in my difficult time. And I said to him, I'm writing this book. I've seen that Bloomsbury, the publisher, have a book proposal form on their website. So if you have an idea for a book, you can fill it in and he said, and again, this is lucky, he said, I know someone that works at Bloomsbury. I used to work with them at MTV, and now they work at Bloomsbury. And
it's a connection.
Yeah, but I would still have probably procrastinated and not done anything about it. But literally the next day, he emailed her, copied me in, and said, my best friend's writing a book on teaching well-being. Are you interested? And she wasn't in editorial, she was in marketing, but she said, look, I know the editors, can you give me a 1-paragraph summary of your book? Which I did, and she came back and said, look, they like it, fill in the document, the proposal, and take it from there. And yeah, they liked the book, and I've took a year to write it, pretty much from beginning to end. And yeah, the idea is to give teachers the research, because I think that's important, the kind of evidence base, like why is this important, and then ideas, practical ideas, like how to bring the research to life in a normal everyday classroom with challenging normal everyday kids.
And you're still teaching now.
Yeah,
So you're applying what's in your book to your daily teaching as well.
yeah, and so I teach part-time now. So I was 3 days a week last year, now I'm 2 days a week. I have enough, because since the book's come out, I'm being invited to give more talks and do training in schools. There's enough work for me to leave teaching completely and do just the what we call in England freelance work, the private work. But actually, one, I still enjoy teaching. Two, part of my mission is still to directly teach these skills to kids. And three, I feel that when I do my talks and go into other schools, I'm talking from a place of experience and authenticity. Like, this is what I do. And when someone says, but what about, and they give me a scenario, I've got experience to say, well, this is how I adapted it for this setting. And, because what happens a lot in UK schools is that the people that do training don't teach, and teachers are sitting there thinking, yeah, that's probably not going to work in my setting because of XYZ.
It's going from theory to practice,
Yeah.
right? And the longer you're outside of the classroom, the more detached, your research might be incredibly important and it might be relevant, but consulting, working with schools, talking to teachers, if you're not in the classroom, you're not able to, as you said, respond to those nuances or those questions. But what about? What if?
Yeah.
You have this one kid that's like this. So all of that is, and it's also just a credit to the fact that you're in the classroom still, while you're a really wonderful public speaker and a fantastic consultant. And I think you do work very well with teachers, and I hope that continues. Two strands of conversation emerge from what you were just sharing, Adrian. One is when I mentioned connection earlier, it's this idea that you knew somebody, well, your best friend knew somebody, believed in what you were working on, could see that you were working. This is a very authentic project from you, Adrian, and connected you to this person at Bloomsbury Publishing, which ended up publishing your book. This idea of connection, right? When you think about connection, and when you think about connection with kids, and you think about your own classroom, or you're thinking about what does every kid need in terms of connection in order to flourish, in order to feel senses of well-being? And as a teacher, how do you encourage that?
Yeah. Well, I've noticed in your book, first section is about connection. In my book, the first chapter is called Creating Tribal Classrooms, which is all about relationships and connection. I think primarily what children ultimately need is to be noticed, like as in the adult has noticed that they exist. They need to be valued as an individual, that they have strengths and qualities and attributes to bring to the classroom environment. And they need a sense of belonging, that they are part of so yes, they're an individual, but actually they're part of something bigger than just themselves, that they are part of a team, part of a tribe, part of a family. And those kind of three things, I think, really help children feel safe. Like, they need to feel safe. That's just like a fundamental, because the safety part is important, because in order to learn, you need children to explore, and you need children to be able to take risks, because it's through that exploration and that risk taking that, actually they'll probably make mistakes as well, and that's really valuable learning for them too. And if they just stay in their little comfort zones, not willing to explore and take risks, then their learning is immediately hampered. And that risk taking takes many forms. It can be related to academic learning. It can also be in terms of connection. Like, they might have had family experiences where making connections is a big risk for them. They might have been let down. So creating that environment in the classroom where actually it's okay for them to maybe reach out and connect to other students and to reach out and connect to other adults in the school is a safe thing to do, that they're going to be, valued, respected. All of that's massively important. And research around attachment theory. So one of the key proponents of that was a psychologist, I guess, called John Bowlby. Essentially, in order to be happy, in order to learn, in order to lead a flourishing life, children need secure attachment with an adult. It's typically the mother, primary caregiver. And one way psychologists measure attachment, and attachment is often psychologists' technical term for love, is by taking a 1-year-old, separating them from their primary caregiver and putting them in a room with a stranger. Sounds horrible when you describe it, but essentially what they're trying to measure is their attachment. And typically children fall into one of 4 categories. Securely attached children will show distress when their caregiver goes, kind of uncertainty with this unfamiliar adult. And then when their familiar adult comes back, they're relieved and they're happy and they carry on as normal. Everything's fine. And that's kind of healthy attachment, secure attachment. Then there's avoidant attachment. So that is where the primary caregiver leaves, child doesn't seem that bothered, primary caregiver comes back and the child doesn't seem that bothered. So they're kind of avoidant. Then there is disorganized attached, which is primary caregiver goes and the child shows kind of dysregulated responses. So they might spin around in circles, they might start tapping on the wall. And often it's because they have parents or caregivers that show frightened or frightening behavior. So the child doesn't know how to regulate themselves. And the 4th one is, it's gone out of my mind now. It will come back to me, but essentially they are distraught when the caregiver goes, and they're still distraught when they come back.
They can't come back to ground level. They can't be regulated, even when the parent comes back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact term, but that's the behavior.
Yeah.
So essentially, our adults will have certain attachment styles, because the attachment styles you develop as a child typically follow you through into adulthood. So it will affect your adult relationships. So our classrooms will have a mixture of kids with all different attachment styles: securely attached, anxiously attached, avoidantly attached, disorganized attached. And the teachers and, adults in the school will have different attachment styles. But the reason this is really important is because you need to meet your children where they are. So you can't, if I'm kind of avoidant, ambivalent, attached adult, meaning I kind of, steer clear of those close connected relationships, and I've got a kind of anxious child, anxiously attached, they're going to be quite needy and want my reassurance. And if I'm not aware of my attachment style, I might find them really annoying and just want to push them away. And that's the worst thing you can do to that child. Whereas if I'm aware that I'm avoidantly attached, I can moderate my behavior to respect what I need, but also give that child what they need as well. So reassurance and some attention and, So I think attachment styles is really important, that teachers are aware of the research behind it, but also practically how you adapt things in the classroom, how you moderate your behavior, and you're aware of your own attachment style, because that's going to impact how you relate to others.
Can we talk about your own attachment style for a second? Not yours necessarily, Adrian, but the attachment style of the teacher, because in listening to you talk about attachment and the 4 different varieties, I was thinking about the teachers that have levels of attachment to their students that also have a variety of extremes, right? So you could have, on the one hand, a teacher who really doesn't care if their students, what they think of them, or just as long as the students do the work and they turn it in on time and blah, blah, blah. And then you can also have a teacher on the other side, which is, I really care that my students like me, and I really care that I'm, connected, and that they feel connected to me on a deeper level than most. What advice would you give for teachers in terms of how they should look at their own feelings of attachment? And I've always said it's attachment versus engagement. I talk about, it's healthy to have a sense of engagement with your students, but you don't want to necessarily be attached to them, because that seems like you're giving of yourself in order to be liked versus respected, blah, blah, blah. Are there any thoughts you have about that? How attachment can be an unhealthy thing in the classroom as well?
Yes. Yeah. I guess a lot of, these ideas and the research around well-being in particular, I think it all comes back to this notion of balance. Like there is there is always, I feel, whatever you're talking about, some middle ground to try and find between unattached, overly attached, and then somewhere in the middle that's probably healthy balance. So yeah, I guess in terms of unhealthy attachment at either ends of the extreme, you've got teachers that don't want to make any connection with their students. They just see their job as conveying content for them to learn, and that's it. That's their job. You know, they don't care about their children's home lives or their friendship issues. They're a teacher. I'm the expert. Here's the knowledge. Learn it, practice, do your homework. See you later.
Right.
And then at the other extreme, maybe are teachers that want and really feel a need to be liked and accepted, and actually might cross some boundaries in order to kind of get that validation from their students.
I can interrupt you for a second because I'm thinking about this movie that if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it, but it's highly disturbing.
Okay.
Called The Kindergarten Teacher.
Right.
Came out about a year ago. Maggie Gyllenhaal plays this kindergarten teacher with a family life that has got emotional holes like the size of the Grand Canyon. And she's a kindergarten teacher. She has this 5-year-old in her classroom, reception teacher, who she attaches to try to fill this hole in her. And anyway, it's a really fascinating study of exactly what you're talking about, the over-attached teacher and looking for something more than what is absolutely acceptable in the student-teacher relationship.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it's made me think, the conference we were at, the Relationships Foundation conference, when one of the speakers was talking about kind of behavior and responding to behavior, and it kind of links to this, and that, you know, this relates to parents as well as teachers, that at either ends of the spectrum you've got permissive kind of parenting, teaching, which you don't really care, do what you want, like kids can behave how they want, and that's really unhealthy for children, like complete lack of boundaries.
It gets back to what you were saying earlier about balance. You know, kids need a sense of balance in order to feel safe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and at the other end of the extreme, you've got authoritarian. So it's kind of do as I say, don't question what I'm saying. These are the rules, just follow them. And that's unhealthy too, because either you get children that really push back and rebel, or you get children that can just completely follow, but they're not learning their own self-regulation. Right. So in the middle, this expert was saying you need authoritative parenting teaching, which is essentially, I'm in charge, but I will respond to your needs. And that's that kind of healthy balance. And I think that's what teachers should be aiming for, which is ultimately I'm in charge because I am the expert in terms of the subject content, largely. I'm also in charge because I'm here to keep you safe. That is part of my job. But equally, if you need something from me, I will listen and I will help you as best as I can. And that's that balance and middle ground. And that's, it probably is something you can read in a book, but I think it's also experiential. You just need to be in the classroom and learn. And like, I'm a parent now, I've got 2 young boys. I'm learning that in the deep end right now. That's hard.
It is hard, isn't it? My goodness. And, you know, let me ask you a question about, you said earlier, you mentioned just in passing that there are studies that show that the emotional level of health that you have when you're about 16 impacts your emotional stability or your emotional self as an adult. Can you just quickly just explain that study or explain that research?
Yeah, so Professor Richard Layard, based at the London School of Economics, carried out a longitudinal study, over 40 years worth of data, thousands of participants. They wanted to look at adults that were reporting high levels of life satisfaction. So they were saying, I'm happy and satisfied with my life. Trace them back through the data to their childhood and work out what's the strongest predictor in childhood of adult happiness, adult life satisfaction. The strongest predictor was the child's emotional well-being at the age of 16. And the weakest predictor of adult happiness was the child's intellectual development. So the grades they were getting, how well they were doing at school, was not a strong predictor at all of who would grow up to be a happy adult.
So when we're looking at like productivity measures in societies and countries, we should be looking more at, it seems like, how emotionally healthy are our 16-year-olds, because inevitably in the future they will be more productive members of our society and of our growth, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to let's focus on the GCSE scores, let's focus on level, whatever A levels, let's focus on. I mean, we need that though, right? I mean, you would agree. We need the measurements, we need the data, right? But we
Yes.
also need to. We can't let that supplant.
No, I think what's happened is that, again, it comes back to balance. We've gone so far the other way of just like bowing down to the god of data that we've forgotten about well-being, emotional health. And there is a balance to be struck. I want my children to be happy, well-rounded individuals. I also want them to do well academically because I know grades are important for securing good work and getting a good job. And by good, I don't mean necessarily well paid or high status. I mean a job that gives you pleasure and purpose. You need good grades for that, but also the grades are a proxy for knowledge. Like, I want my children to be knowledgeable of themselves and the world. Like, which teacher wouldn't want that? I think we've just gone too far though of worshipping data. And in that act, when children become numbers, you essentially dehumanize them. And I think that's why we have certain problems in the UK education system, because we've forgotten that there are individual human beings in classrooms, and the teachers as well teaching them. We've forgotten about them and their lives and their, I think that's what we need to remember more.
And ironically, that humanness is a primary, if not the primary, incentive toward learning that promotes engagement. If you are allowed to be, as a teacher, an authentic adult, the only adult in the room, an authentic presence, somebody who's able to be his own individual there in the classroom that he is running, or she, that students tap into that. This, right? Like, even at the young age, students can sense insincerity. They can sense somebody who's trying to be something they're not. A very easy mistake that younger teachers or teachers who are newer to the profession make is to try to be perfect, to try to be like the font of all knowledge. And if I can't make a mistake, or else my students will judge me as weak, when really it's the opposite. Like, that kind of approach actually promotes distance, versus a teacher who's like, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe we can discover this together as a class. Extra credit tonight for anybody who comes, home and figures out the answer and brings it to me. Brings it tomorrow. Blah blah blah. Right?
Yeah. Well, and also I think it's important as teachers to show that we are continually learning, and it's impossible to know everything. So when a student asks me something I don't know, I say I don't know, and either find it out and let me know, because I'm fascinated to find that out, or I'll have a look as well, and let's reconvene tomorrow. And
you've never had a student walk out on your classroom when you said you don't know the answer?
No.
Protesting.
Yeah. No.
Mr. Bethune doesn't know the answer, so I'm leaving.
Yeah. Well, do you know what's even more kind of funny is when you're doing, let's say, a maths equation and you're kind of solving on the board, and then a child in your class will say, "Mr. Bethune, you've forgotten to carry the tens," and like, you've completely messed up this example. And it's important to own those mistakes and just say, look, I'm 38 years old. I've been learning maths my whole life, and I still make mistakes, and that's okay. And like, now that mistake has now meant I will double and triple check every time I do this on the board. So there's value in those mistakes, and that's important to communicate to kids as well.
Because the kids, they are watching all the time. Ted and Nancy Sizer are big educational. Ted has since passed away, but Nancy is writing and researching around Harvard and Cambridge, US. And they wrote a book together called The Students Are Watching. And they're always watching. And they're not always going to watch for like, oh, I'm so excited to learn about remainders or handwriting or cursive, but they are watching you. And they might not want to be a teacher themselves, but they are watching for how you, as the adult, respond to this, this, and this. And they don't have the words to articulate it, certainly, but they are looking for actions that they can emulate and that they respect.
There's a quote I use in my book, comes from a child developmental psychologist called Professor Alison Gopnik.
Yes, of course.
Who is American. Written a brilliant book called The Gardener and the Carpenter.
Yeah.
And the quote I use in my book is that children learn far more from their caregivers' unconscious behaviours than any of their conscious manipulations. And I love that. That just makes me think of teaching, like I'm here teaching you stuff and this is what I'm consciously trying to get you to do or to learn. But actually my body language, my tone, when you see me in the corridor, you know, when the photocopy is not working and how I respond in that moment, that's what the children are most soaking up.
I always talk about the time when like a teacher will interrupt my classroom just as I'm about to teach Odysseus stringing his bow and about to slaughter the suitors and just building up. And then immediately, just as he's about to shoot the arrow, the math teacher comes in and says, "Hey, do you have a dry erase marker? Because mine just ran out." Like nobody in the classroom cares about Odysseus or Telemachus or anything at that point. All they care about is how Mr. Damon is going to respond to that math teacher. And is he going to be graceful? Is he going to be rude? Is he going to be annoyed? Does he have a dry erase marker? Like, you know. So you know how it is. Like that's how it is. Last topic we'll briefly talk about now, but it's so important because you've mentioned this word several times in this conversation, and it's the word tribe. And as an American, the word tribe is actually right now, anyway, kind of viewed kind of negatively, all right, and just by society because, you know, which tribe are you in? Which identity affinity group do you belong to? Are you Democrat or Republican? Are you liberal or conservative? Are we not blah, blah, blah. And it's been used as a term that talks about division and that talks about building a wall. You tend to be using tribe in a very positive way and in terms of applying it to the classroom. And I'd just love to hear you talk a bit about how the classroom as a tribe has worked for you and also how it has been able to achieve sense of belonging and a sense of safety for your students and for you in this classroom that you designed. So can you talk about that a little bit?
So this idea of kind of tribal classrooms, which is the first chapter of my book, comes from Professor Louis Cozolino, another American academic.
California. He comes from Pepperdine, I think.
Yes. Yeah. He's Italian heritage because he talks about it in his book originally. And essentially what he says is that human beings are a tribal species, and that for hundreds of thousands of years we've lived in tribes, and it's only very recently, in the last 5,000 years, we've moved to the industrial-based societies we live in now. And he essentially says that 5,000 years is not enough time in terms of biological evolution to move from the animal that we are, which is a tribal species. And so his research and his book is about how you can tap into what he calls the primitive social instincts of children, which is about needing to belong to a group, to a tribe, because that literally turns on their brains for learning. It makes them feel safe, secure, happy. It has benefits on their immune system. You know, it reduces the amount of cortisol, the stress hormone. When people feel connected, we feel good and we do good. So when I first started to bring this research and this idea into my classroom, it was when I was teaching a year 2 class. So they were 6 years old, and their reception teacher had gone off on stress leave. Their year 1 teacher had gone off on stress leave. And then I was inheriting this class in year 2. And I was starting to panic because they were not a cohesive bunch of children. They were not kind to each other. They were always trying to get one another into trouble. And I remember thinking over the summer holidays, and I'm going to get this class in a month's time. How can I create this sense of team? We need to work together if we're going to, have a good year, essentially. So I did a lot of work around creating a sense of tribe. I wanted these children to feel like, actually, you are part of a team in this classroom, that at the moment, we're not getting along, but actually we can work on every single day. We can work on what we can do to kind of look out for one another, to cooperate, to learn how to share, to take turns. And so that year was my focus. Like maths and English were kind of secondary to how can I get these children to work better together, to feel like they belong and connect. Because there's research out there that shows that a sense of belonging is fundamental to learning. So if I want to teach in English and maths and science and everything else, these children need to feel like they belong. So I did some work around kind of creating a team flag, which was essentially we looked at a video of Team GB at the Olympics, and we thought about what makes them successful, like attributes, qualities, so things like perseverance, friendship, kindness, effort, teamwork, determination. And then I gave each child a plain piece of paper and I said, choose the value that means something to you. So I wanted to make it personal to them. Write it in bold on your piece of paper, fill your page with colour. And we pieced these 30 separate pieces of paper together and it created this large team flag.
So this flag was a mosaic of every one of your 30 students, not only choosing the term that they thought of when they watched Team Great Britain GB video, what brings them together, but also it was the way that they designed their part of the flag, their section was individualized.
Yeah, so the value that they chose and also how they designed it was completely up to them. And so then you have this beautiful tapestry of individual values that together make our team flag. So we became Team Picasso then, because our name was Class Picasso. And it was really about communicating to the children. You might have just created this one small piece of the flag. You might have just chosen the value of love. But actually, you're part of something bigger than just yourself. You're part of Team Picasso, and that the success of our team relies on all of us working together. Like, we can't do this alone individually. If we're going to have a good year, if we're going to learn stuff, if we're going to have fun whilst we're learning, we need to work together. And it was also about communicating that these values, as part of our team flag, they are a work in progress. Like this idea of perfectionism. We are not the finished product. Like, we are working towards showing love. We're working towards being determined. Like, we're not the finished product. And, you know, by the end of that year with that class, and it was a very difficult year, it wasn't easy. It's not easy creating a sense of team and tribe amongst children that don't like each other. It's really hard. By the end of that year, I was completely besotted with that class. They are still one of, you know, I know you shouldn't have favourites, but you can't help it.
Most memorable.
Yeah, most memorable, yeah. And then I moved to year 4 after teaching them, and I got them back 2 years later. And we made another team flag, and the values were slightly different, and we worked again. We continued to work on being a team and a tribe, because in London schools, lots of children move around, so probably 6 or 7 kids had left, and I had 6 new ones. So, and then at the end of year 4, I moved out of London, and in the UK, children leave primary school in year 6, so they're age of 10, 11. And I'd promised them that I would return for their leaving assembly. They have this big assembly where they graduate. And so 2 years later, I came back into London just to attend their leavers assembly, because I was part of their tribe and I'd made that promise. And that class stay in my mind when I think about tribal classrooms, because we went on a huge journey. It was hard work, but there was a real sense of belonging as part of that journey. And yeah, they're a class I think fondly of now.
Adrian, this is wonderful. I'm going to ask you a curveball question, all right, which relates very much to everything we've been talking about and ties us back to the beginning of our conversation as a way to conclude this conversation, which is how has establishing a tribe-based or tribal classroom, I've always looked at the teacher-student dynamic as reciprocal, and it's not just the teacher who is imparting information, explaining the rules and regulations, maintaining oversight of the classroom, blah, blah, blah. A teacher also can, if open to it, be the recipient of a lot of information that helps that teacher to grow. In a sense, every student holds a mirror up to what we do every day, like the students are watching. And I'm just curious for you, and you might want to think for a second about this, because the way we began this conversation was really looking at your story, and you had a real kind of hero's journey, in a sense, of what brought you into the classroom. This epiphany that I want to leave the music industry, which could make me a lot of money and could be kind of this very, very status-y kind of job. But with that, accept the kind of loneliness that comes with the job that's really about chasing money, in a sense, the maybe dullness of just looking at spreadsheets and budgeting and all that stuff. And I want to be in the classroom. I want to do something generative. I want to do something that's giving, and that's da-da-da. So that was your moment, I think, of moving into the classroom. But what do the kids give back to you in a tribal classroom is my question. Like, how did you find it as, in a sense, a an environment that helped you get from that period of loneliness, darkness, toward your flourishing life that you're leading today?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess when you are creating a tribal classroom, like as the teacher, you are a part of that tribe, and so they, as part of my tribe, gave me a really strong sense of meaning and purpose. So like I was there to, in a sense, be the tribal leader, but equally when you work on that connection, that sense of belonging, it's what some people call micro moments, that you get so many positive micro moments from your tribe, such as, kids coming up to you at playtime, you're out on playground duty, and just, coming up to have a conversation and just tell you about their day because they have that sense of connection. It's about a child at the end of your lesson coming up to you saying, "Mr. Bethune, I really enjoyed that lesson, thank you." It's all of those little micro moments that I think come from creating a sense of tribe, and that, I get a sense of belonging to Team Picasso and whatever other team I've created as much as they get a sense of belonging. Like every day when tribal classrooms are like at the forefront of your mind, your purpose, your mission is extremely and abundantly clear, like why I'm here. Like, yes, I'm here to teach, a bit of Shakespeare and a bit of equivalent fractions and all of that, but actually I am here to connect with you, for you to connect with me, and we're going to go on this learning journey together. So yeah, it's definitely reciprocal. And whereas in the music industry, yeah, I was part of a team, as in I was on a team, but we all worked at separate desks and we all had lunch separately. But in the classroom, it is visceral. When you've worked hard at creating a tribal classroom, it is really visceral. The feeling is like, this is my class, this is my tribe, this is where I'm meant to be. And yeah, it's that sense of purpose is just really clear, and it's something that I completely lacked in music, and I guess I didn't realize it at the time because the job was pleasurable, so I enjoyed it. I got to have nice lunches and I got to have nice meetings at music publishers and things like that, but actually pleasure can only take you so far, and I think that deeper sense of meaning and purpose, which ultimately I think comes from connection, is what tribal classrooms give you. So you have this strong sense of purpose, and also because you're a tribe and you're having fun learning, you get the pleasure as well. So you get that nice balance of pleasure and purpose.
Adrian, an unexpected takeaway from this conversation is my hope that there are people listening to this episode who are mid-career, thinking about changing careers, maybe thinking about going into the classroom themselves. And the story like Adrian's, really this idea of you can make this change. And if your heart and if your spirit is motivating you toward moving into a school environment, Adrian's a great example. Listen to this again, and you'll see, you'll see how Adrian's a great example of somebody who had a career going and made this change and absolutely flourished. And that could be any of you listening too. I want to thank you very, very much,
Thank
Adrian.
you,
This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's been great.
Too. Likewise. Cheers. And enjoy your tea.
You've been listening to Reach, Teach, Talk with Nat Damon. If you'd like to recommend a guest for a future episode, you can send your suggestion or questions to nat@reachacademics.com.